Hello, and welcome to Health and Fitness Redefined. I'm your host, Anthony Amen. Join me today as we take a dive into the world of health and fitness, where we learn to overcome adversity to pick fact versus fiction and see health and fitness in a whole new light. Today, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to go a little bit out there, if you know what I mean. But I'm super excited to learn about things that personally I know absolutely nothing about. So before we really dive into what we're talking about, who we're meeting, let me welcome to the show Jonathan Potter. Let's get him on up here. And welcome to the show, Jonathan. Super excited to have you.
Hi, Anthony. It's great to be here, and excited to discuss this. I think these conversations are sometimes best with people who don't really know the subject. So, looking forward to it.
Yeah, I think I'm just going to ask you all the questions that probably all your clients ask you. So just right up your boat right here. So first, tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got involved into becoming the CEO of Behold Retreats. Take us back, man.
Yeah, sure. And I guess I think for me the right place to start is actually my childhood. So I grew up with pretty alternative hippie parents, and I was lucky enough to grow up in Hawaii. Now, for anyone who doesn't know Hawaii, it's a pretty substance-rich, shall we say, environment. It's Hawaii is a beautiful, magical, tropical, amazing landscape to grow up in, but it's got a little bit of a dark side as well. So it's got a lot of problems with substance abuse, drug abuse, alcohol abuse, these sorts of things. And so growing up in that environment, and being through the American education system, as we all have, I really did not feel attracted to anything that was like substances. So my parents were pretty open-minded. They were spiritual. I was very much in the other direction. So I was not open-minded to any sort of substances that might alter our minds, and I was not open-minded to spirituality. So I was actually an atheist, and so for most of my life, most of my career, I went into the corporate world and spent most of my time in my life in management consulting and in strategy work, first in New Zealand and then subsequently throughout Asia. And after about 10 years in that line of work, I just remember looking myself in the mirror one morning and thinking, gosh, there has to be more to life than just that next promotion. There has to be more to life than that next paycheck, that next thing, that next client, the next deal. And there just has to be something more. And so I decided to take a year off. And as part of that, two friends came and joined me in Peru, and we decided to join an ayahuasca retreat, which was about 5 years ago now. And it was a completely unexpected, transformational experience. It opened the door to spirituality, and life has never been quite the same since.
Walk us through that, showing up to a retreat where somebody coming from the corporate world. So I'm just going to vision myself for a second, like all of us are. What do you do? What's the day-to-day function? What's the vibe like? Take us through that.
Yeah, well, the reason I actually gave this a chance was that I had witnessed a transformation in a friend of mine about 10 years prior to my own attending of a retreat. And she left for the retreat. She'd unfortunately had a pretty challenging childhood. She left for a retreat, shy and, pretty negative and closed-minded, and she could just never kind of get in the flow of things in life. And she came back like a really transformed person. And I remember thinking at the time, this doesn't quite resonate. This doesn't align with the narrative that I have in my mind and what we've been taught around, substances that can alter your perception and your perceptions of reality. So that kind of anchored in my mind. And so when we had this opportunity in Peru, I thought, okay, this is, why I'm taking a year off, is to try and find myself and, understand more about what life is about and the potentiality of life. And it seems like this could be some meaningful part of that. But truth be told, Anthony, I was genuinely underprepared for the power of the experience. And so, I went into that, again, as I said, an atheist. I went into that thinking I had a lot of the answers, quote unquote, right about life. And it was a very humbling, very challenging experience. We were there for just about a week, and ceremony after ceremony, it was very challenging in terms of just showing me things about myself, showing me things about my life. It showed me some really amazing and beautiful things about the good things that I've done in my life and the good things that I've done for people. But it also showed me the opposite, right, where I wasn't turning up at my best and I wasn't bringing the types of energy into the world that I aspire to. And so, I think in essence, the nature of this work with plant medicine, with psychedelics, is really about trying to harmonize the subconscious mind, right? That's what we're trying to do, is to tap into that subconscious and to resolve some of the trauma, some of the negativity of mind, and some of the past challenging experiences that have, left a negative imprint on our being.
Was it more of like just somebody from the outside? It just sounds like, is it just a ceremony where I hear pass the pipe, like I'm thinking of some American Indians, or is it more of, hey, this is a therapy, like kind of retreat you would get for alcoholics or drug abuse? Where are we sitting into it?
Yeah, so there are different retreats that I would say, in a broad sense, there are different retreats that represent different energy. The retreat that we went to was in the Sacred Valley of Peru, which is near Machu Picchu. Incredible, beautiful location. More of a shamanic style of retreat, and really beautiful, secluded property with beautiful fruit trees and a couple friendly pets on the property, and just really a sacred space, for people to come together, and amazing, beautiful food. And so the way that it works is usually, day one you arrive, you kind of get settled in, get comfortable with the people that are there, meet the psychologist or the facilitators and the healers that are on hand, and just kind of align energetically, I suppose, with them. Then often the second day will be the first ceremony. So we typically assemble in the evening, because these medicines make you quite photosensitive, and so you assemble in the evening. There's usually a ceremonial area for the for the medicine to take place, and usually it's after dark, and so people drink the medicine in a circle or in a semicircle. The shamans start to do their work with it, which is singing some of the icaros, which is the kind of ancient songs that go along with the medicine work. And after about 30 to 45 minutes, it begins to take effect. And so it has a pretty profound impact on mind, body, heart, and spirit. So it really detoxifies the body, and it begins to reconnect mind, body, heart, and spirit in ways that we may not have experienced. It doesn't tend to have the intensity of the effects on people who live closer to the earth, because they haven't been so disconnected from the planet and from themselves. But for a lot of foreigners that are coming, say, from a desk job and down into this experience, it can be very challenging, because there's a lot of toxicity that has been built up in the body over years. There's often a lot of stuff that's happening in the mind that's not so pretty, and there's a lot of energetic stuff that needs to be released and removed from the body to come back into I guess, a healthier state of being.
Wow, that's awesome, man. And then you're doing this for a week. But what was that transition from, hey, this thing changed my life, to, hey, let me go do this on my own? And right now you said in Thailand. So fix that connection gap for us for a second.
Yeah, so I had a very profound experience, as I shared before, but I also didn't integrate the lessons well. So I wasn't really prepared for the experience. So I was really knocked out by the experience itself. And then post-retreat, what I found was that I really did kind of return to normal. Even though I had such a powerful experience, everything in my life kind of returned to the way that it was before. And there wasn't much guidance after the retreat in terms of, hey, you've had this very powerful experience. Here's how you can think about this to better your life. So I was a little bit lost, in relation to that. And so I spent the subsequent years actually attending quite a number of these other retreats, trying to understand more about myself, about this work with plant medicine that was, pretty compelling and powerful. But I knew there was more there for me. So I was able to unpack over those years of retreats. I was really able to unpack a lot more about, what was going on in my subconscious, release a lot of lower level emotions. We all have a lot of shame, guilt, fear, grief, apathy, envy, anger, pride. These are all emotions that are stuck in the physical body. And so through learning tools for emotional processing, through learning tools for metacognition, I became more confident in my own ability to make progress in relation to this work and to elevate my consciousness. And so through that process, became very motivated to help others not have such challenging experiences as I had had, and also to guide them towards the tools and the experiences that really do provide more sustained benefits to the quality of the human experience. Because, I always say to clients, you don't want an ayahuasca retreat, right? You don't want a psychedelic retreat necessarily. What you're looking for is improvements to your quality of life. And in order for that to come true, a number of other things also need to be true in order to get the most out of the plant medicine work. The way that I look at this work now is it's 80% mental and emotional work, which is what allows the 20% with plant medicine and psychedelics to be as transformational as possible. But a lot of people are just jumping straight to the work with the plant medicine, and they're skipping the human work, the mental and emotional work. And that's why if you look at any sort of psychedelic scene or community, they're not necessarily the embodiment of an energy of love and peace and joy and abundance that you would hope for if this was really, as powerful as some people claim it to be. So, that's really a lot of what we do differently is like, look, this is about mental and emotional work, and then the plant medicine, the psychedelics can help you facilitate that transformation, but you still got to do the work.
Kind of like going to, I don't know if this is relatable, you can correct me, but a psychiatrist where the work being with them is, hey, let's get you on track. It's a lot of follow-up. It's a lot of focus on mental health. And then the medicine just kind of helps bring you along that trajectory or that path.
Yeah, I think that's
Instead of the hard drugs from big pharma, it's plant-based.
Exactly. And I think it's a useful bridge. I think the difference is that these medicines, when people have the right expert guidance and facilitation around these experiences, the goal is for them to very much come off of any other medication. So, we guide quite a few clients that are coming off of SSRIs and other things that perhaps they've been on for years, and to be able to, to come down off those, attend one of these transformational experiences, and then not have to go back to the meds that they're on from an anxiety or depression perspective. So, that's very much something that it's not an area that we specialize in. We more focus on getting people from good to great. But there are a lot of people out there who are on these SSRIs, and, they're ready to, get back within themselves and depend wholly upon themselves as opposed to some, external meds in order to be well.
That's awesome, man. And you were saying you guys do two different types of retreats. So the first one is more of one-on-one counseling, and then you'll kind of meet them somewhere. And then the other one is they're actually spending a couple of weeks pre-retreat, then going to a retreat with a group of people in certain countries you were explaining. Want to talk a little more about that?
Yeah, so the major difference, or the two ways that we guide our clients, is one through a 7-week process, which typically includes a 1-week retreat, and the second is just the 1-week retreat. So for those clients that are ready to go deep with themselves and surface their limiting thought patterns, their limiting beliefs, really understand the basis for some of the behaviors that are no longer serving them, and really anchor around their future self, right? Because these medicines, they're very powerful experiences, and they respond to intentionality. So the more clear that we get about future self, right, in terms of health, in terms of relationships, in terms of passion for work and abundance and all of those sorts of good things that absolutely every single one of us in this life deserves, right? Not a single one of us is a random permutation of evolution. I truly believe that. We all have divine purpose. We all have inherent divinity within our being, and we're all here to share and give our unique gifts and strengths out to the world, right? We're all here to give. And so to discover that for ourselves and to anchor around that, and then for the plant medicine to, I guess, accelerate and facilitate that connection to the higher self. And so to be able to bring back some of that guidance in relation to, hey, here's what you are, here's who you are, and here's what you're really good at. And to have this, I often describe this as sort of a vertical knowledge, right? It's not like when you read something, it's like, oh yeah, okay, that makes sense. But this is embodied knowledge on a different level, where you can feel like, okay, this is what I am in every cell of your body. And it's like, wow, that's super powerful. And some of these realizations, that can come, sometimes they sound super silly, right? Like I've had one, when I was first starting with plant medicine, one of the big realizations and breakthroughs that I had on one of my retreats was spend more time doing what you love. And it sounds, when you say it sounds so trite and so obvious, right? It's like, oh yeah, of course. But like when you feel that in every cell of your body, and it's just a much different, much more powerful embodied experience.
I love that. Spend more time doing what you love, because I full-heartedly believe that when you love your work, kind of like you and I feel like it's not work. It's fun.
Absolutely.
It definitely goes a long way. So I want to talk a little bit about the plant medicine you were explaining. You're doing this kind of plant medicine, this kind. You mentioned a couple types pre-show. So just walk us through what kind of plant medicine you guys are working with. And then I just want to really focus on each one individual to see, because I know nothing about them. I'm not going to sit here and be like, oh yeah, that one. So walk us through the medicines.
Yeah, sure. So there's primarily 3 that we work with. So I'll start with those, and then if there's any others that you have heard of or have interest of, we can go there as well. So the 3 that we work with tends to be, number 1, psilocybin, which is the active ingredient in magic mushrooms. There's evidence for, I guess, ancient wisdom traditions using magic mushrooms virtually across the entire world. Whether we talk about, the Tibetan traditions, the Central and South American traditions. There's even Scandinavian and Irish traditions. So, the mushroom has certainly been just about everywhere. In relation to that, there's actually some science that's coming out, I believe from Harvard, if I'm not mistaken, later this year, that it's going to provide a pretty compelling case for the fact that it's not that these medicines do interesting things to our brains. It's actually that our brains are as developed and as interesting as they are, in no small part because we have co-evolved with these types of medicines. So these medicines are very powerful neurogenetically, right? Which means that they create new neurons in the brain, and they support neuroplasticity. So they actually reconnect regions of the brain that normally don't interchange information. So this is part of the reason why people have big realizations with these experiences, is because the brain is being reconnected.
I want to stop you on that one, because that one I actually know stuff about. I didn't know the medicinal name for it, but magic mushrooms, and a light bulb went off to a little bit of the side. You are right. I've seen different types of studies, and I believe it is Harvard, showing that there have been benefits for those that suffer with anxiety and depression, because it helps rewire the brain, making different neurological connections. Now, I've talked about this previously on my show, where we can actually do this ourselves, but it's very, very, very difficult to learn how to rewire your brain. And somebody who suffers from depression, I think that's the most broad spectrum one. The reason you start with slight depression, which is you create that connection, and then they constantly hardwire that connection. It's the same thing as working a muscle. When you constantly do that same motion over and over and over again, you create that mind to muscle connection, becomes easier, same thing in our brain. So if we keep working that depression connection, the self down talk, it's just going to get worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. And it takes a lot of brain power to rewire that connection, because it takes just as much work to do that. And I've seen that magic mushrooms are actually able to help you rewire that back through. For those that, like I said, it's very, very difficult to learn how to rewire your brain. So I do
It
love
is.
that one.
Yeah, and you know, it's you can see this. There's a study, a 2014 study from the Journal of Royal Society Interface, which doesn't exactly roll off the tongue. But what they've done is through a series of MRIs, they've done scans on your typical Western brain. And if you can imagine a circle, and along the outside of the circle, there's additional circles that represent each of the regions of the brain. And then what it shows is it shows the amount of interconnectivity between each region of the brain and each other region of the brain. So it's showing the many to many relationship. Now, what that shows is that in your typical modern Western brain, you basically have a small subset of neural pathways that are overused like crazy. So we have, just because we're so overwhelmed, we're so stressed, we're so busy, we've had to become almost as like an energy efficient mechanism to respond to everything that's going on in life. We've just become really overly patterned in our thinking and in our behavior just to cope with everyday life. Now, in contrast, if you look at a MRI of someone who is under the influence of psilocybin magic mushrooms, you can see that there's free flow of information between parts of the brain. And so one example that I sometimes give is that, you know, if you imagine someone who says, "Oh, I love my wife," and in fact they're not being faithful to their wife. Well, that's an example of a compartmentalized brain, physical compartmentalization, because they're holding these two incongruent thoughts within the single mind. And so if people had someone of this description was to have one of these experiences, it's very likely that those two thoughts would need to come together and have some sort of reconciliation, because those are two things that shouldn't exist within a healthy brain. Now, the third data point, which I think is the most fascinating and interesting, is if you take someone who has 30 years meditation practice and you compare them to the first two images, their brain looks much more like a brain on psilocybin, with the regions of the brain healthy and interconnected, versus the typical modern Western brain, which has got a highly compartmentalized network, typically what we call an overactive default mode network in the brain. And as a result of that, the regions of the brain, there's the overuse of a small subset of neural pathways. The other stats that I think you'll find interesting is the National Science Foundation recently did some surveys on thinking and on thoughts. And what they found was that your typical person has, number one, between 12,000 and 60,000 thoughts per day. So lots and lots of thoughts. Number two, what they found was that almost all of those thoughts are egoic thoughts. So they're thoughts that relate to I, me, and my. So they're thoughts about myself. The third thing about this, which is fascinating, is that 95% of those thoughts are repetitive. So they're having the same thoughts over and over and over again. And then the last thing, and this is the heartbreaker, 85% of those thoughts are negative. So people are having a ton of thoughts. They're only thinking about themselves. They're thinking the same things about themselves, and they're thinking negative things about themselves. And most people this is so patterned, it's so ingrained for most people that they don't even know it. And so that's a lot of what we do with clients, is to show them, hey, you're not being nearly as nice to yourself as you might. And so you might be motivating yourself from a place of fear as opposed to from a place of love. And wouldn't it be nice to make that transition for yourself? And then once you're making that transition for yourself, guess what? That's going to turn up in your outside world as well. And your life's going to get a whole lot better if you're able to manage that transition.
Yeah, and I just, for your own knowledge, to kind of emphasize a point, I suffered from depression at a very young age. And I felt that cyclical cycle of constantly getting worse and worse and worse and worse and worse, until eventually I got to a breaking point where I had to make a decision. It's go down road A, and that's pretty much it, or it's change my life and go down road B. So I sat there for an overnight of 12 hours, really contemplating how I could help rewire my brain into more of a positive construct. And over the course of about 3 weeks, 3 weeks, not 3 hours, I have that same repetitive motion, which is what you were talking about. I constantly had to say, I'm happy, I'm happy, I'm happy, I'm happy, I'm happy, I'm happy. And I constantly had to say, you're not shy, you're not shy, you're not shy. Go talk to people, because I was a super shy and introvert. And I was able to pull myself out of that depressive state. And I've never had it again. But it's the
That's
point being, that was a lot of work. And I know a lot of people would have given up out of the first, second, third, fourth attempt of failure, because there was a lot of failure, because it took a lot of work to help rewire my brain a different direction to be happier. So it's a very interesting thought. And that's why I've been a believer for a lot of people that probably don't necessarily understand this type of work, where it's like you can rewire your brain. It's possible. It's just very, very difficult.
Yeah, you know what's interesting about this is that's incredible. Thank you for sharing that. I think that's an incredible story and inspiring. And I think the other thing that I think is important in relation to this is to share that story that, look, there's many roads to a healthy mind, right? I think plant medicine can play a role. I think someone as determined as yourself in your past circumstances certainly can find a way. I think breath work, meditation, there's many ways to get there. Personally, plant medicine has played a fundamental role for me, and I'm an advocate. But it's not that I think that plant medicine or psychedelics in of themselves are positive. They're just neutral. They amplify energy, and so they're amplifying your access to parts of your mind and your body and your spirit that you might otherwise not have access to on the day by day. And I think there's great power in that. But there's certainly other tools and mechanisms to get there. Now, coming back, we were speaking about medicine, so we got stuck on psilocybin, magic mushrooms. The other two that we work with are ayahuasca. Ayahuasca is a combination of two plants from Central and South America. It's grown to be quite popular in recent times. Very powerful medicine. That's the retreat that I attended in Peru, and that's the medicine that we were working with. And then the third medicine that we work with is the underlying molecule within ayahuasca is known as DMT, dimethyltryptamine, which is also often described as the spirit molecule. And then the final medicine that we work with, and this one's certainly getting a lot more attention and more popular, is 5-MeO DMT, and that's also referred to as the God molecule or the toad medicine. Very, very powerful experience. It's much shorter than the ceremonies with ayahuasca or psilocybin, but it's a very powerful experience.
Talk to us about those two a little bit more, and what that experience is like. You mentioned it's a longer, it's a shorter. What does that necessarily mean?
Yeah. So with ayahuasca, as I shared before, it's working on all of these medicines are working on all levels in terms of mind, body, heart, and spirit. But ayahuasca in particular is known for, as I shared before, its detoxifying and its physical healing properties, right? So there's much more science that's coming out now in relation to healing autoimmune disorders, healing cancer, healing there's one that we had one client who's she healed her vision. She came back from a retreat. She's like, wow, that was the vision. My vision is so clear. And I was like, oh, you know what you're going to do with your future? And she was like, no, my eyes, like I've never been able to see so clearly. I was like, wow, that's incredible. So there's it begins to sound like a little bit like a silver bullet, but it's incredible to look at the variety of healing that is possible through these medicines, because again, they are harmonizing mind, body, heart, and spirit. And so everything is just vibrational, right? And so whatever it is that we're suffering from, typically it has some sort of vibrational component. And so, the way I look at this work is it's harmonizing mind, body, heart, and spirit. And then it's trying to bring the mind, body, heart, and spirit up to a higher frequency, up to a higher vibration. And that's what we're trying to achieve. So ayahuasca tends to have that very powerful physical effect. It's got a purgative effect as well. So for me, honestly speaking, the first night I threw up probably 150 times on my first ceremony.
God.
Yeah, it was very challenging. And I probably drank a little bit too much during my years of consulting life in Hong Kong. I wasn't an alcoholic or anything like that, but it's part of the work hard, play hard lifestyle in the management consulting world. And so there was a lot of lower level stuff and toxicity to get out of the physical body and the energetic and spiritual bodies as well. So it was not comfortable. And you know, I went into that having respected the diet and all of the things that one should do in preparation. But truth be told, I was not prepared for that experience.
That blows my mind. And then you were talking about the God particle. Everyone just kind of flipped, maybe like me, just heard it maybe in passing once or twice. What necessarily is it? What's it like when you take it? Just really brief on that.
Yeah. So with these other experiences, one of the things that we're looking for is to achieve what is known as ego dissolution or ego death, right? So that is the moment where you genuinely think you're going to die. You think, this is it. I'm going to die. Now, there's the reason I share that is because there's a conference that I attended last year that is known as Dying and Living. And the whole concept of that conference is that you first need to have your ego death before you can begin to live your real life. And in that moment, there's a transformation of self that takes place, which is that you realize that you are not this body, you are not your thoughts, you are not all of these other things. You are this eternal spiritual being. And there's great power in that to connect with your true essence. And then, you know, from that place to begin to, I guess, rediscover self anew. And so the reason I share that is with these other medicines, that process of reaching ego dissolution can and does take quite a bit of time. It depends, you know, some people have it on their first ceremony. Other people might, you know, it might be years before they have actually an experience such as that, and over many, many retreats. And there's no right and wrong, right? Whatever takes place for an individual is what takes place for an individual. Now, in contrast with 5-MeO DMT, it's a very powerful ego dissolving experience. So the medicine is smoked, and within 5 to 10 seconds, basically reality itself breaks apart in front of you, and we are moved into complete non-duality. So that means that there is no more you, there is no more other. There is just one. You are one with the universe. There is no more separation between you and the universe. So the description that I like is almost like if you think of us being a part of the universe that has been twisted off like a balloon, you know, like you take a balloon, you twist off a part of the balloon. Now, what this experience does is it untwists that balloon so that you can see that you are very much an integral and whole part of the universe. And you come to this within the space of 10 seconds. Now, usually the peak of the experience is about 10 to 20 minutes. As people start working with this medicine, it's very common that they don't recollect a great deal because so much is happening in a short space of time. But time itself has absolutely no meaning, right? So there's no such thing as space. There's no such thing as time. There's no such thing as humans or being. There's just experience. And so you are just being raised up into higher and higher levels of consciousness and experiencing consciousness itself from higher and higher places, if that makes any sense.
Blows my mind. The whole
It's
thing, I'm
powerful.
gonna be honest. I'm just like, I just kind of brings up a point which I'm sure you get this question a lot, and I'm sure this is the first question everyone asks you, but I'm asking it at the end. Whereas, how do you break the difference between these kind of plant-based medicines and plant-based drugs that people generally relate this kind of stuff to, where this is a psychedelic drug where you're going to become addicted to? People start thinking of addicts roaming the street. What's the difference, and how do you explain this to people?
Yeah, and I think that's a good subjects to tap into always. So a few of the things that I always share is, you know, different people have different motivations for exploring these medicines, right? So for some people it's healing, other people it's growth or creativity, self-understanding, right? Other people it's more spiritual in nature. And certainly you can have any combination of those. And then the last two is number 4, recreational, right? Some people are just want to have fun. Now, personally speaking, it's never been really a recreational thing for me. You know, you hear stories about people taking this recreational and going to a concert or something like that, and then, you know, some part of early childhood trauma or something like that gets unlocked. To me, that doesn't sound like exactly the right sort of context for these sorts of powerful experiences. And then the last, which does occur, is abuse, right? But now that being said, um, these substances, medically speaking, are classified as non-addictive, right? So they are not like alcohol, tobacco, cocaine, methamphetamines, that have a very strong addictive potential for a lot of people. So there's, I really cannot say that I've ever encountered someone that I would say would be quote unquote addicted to psychedelics, because they are such powerful experiences, sacred experiences. And if people come to abuse them, I think one of the messages that they would be likely to get would be like, "Hey, you're abusing this. Take this more seriously." Would be a likely experience that I would imagine. So, the other aspect that's important is in relation to safety, right? And so when we have taken the right precautions for ourselves in terms of diet and intentionality, and really prepared well for the experience, when we go through a high quality safety screening to make sure that we don't have any contraindicated medications or contraindicated mental health disorders or any physical traumas from the past or physical diseases that might lead to a more challenging experiences, then these experiences are safe. So, we have facilitators on our team that have been doing this work for 30 years with, knock on wood, without a single major adverse event. So this work is safe when it's taken sufficiently seriously. Now, unfortunately, given the excitement that's coming in relation to the space, and the excitement is really coming and building very, very rapidly, I do think that a lot more people are getting more desperate in terms of seeking out experiences and wanting to be, better than they are. And as a result of that, we're going to go through a period, I think, in the next 5 years where we are going to see a lot more psychedelic harm, because there's just a lot more people doing this a lot more quickly without necessarily enough people who are well experienced in being facilitators and guides for those people who want to have these experiences. So, thankfully, there's a lot more infrastructure that's quickly being built in terms of, psychedelic support hotlines and these sorts of things that are coming, that I think should ease the burden as more and more people do experiments with their own consciousness.
Yeah, I really like that explanation. It's talking about the non-addictive side. You're talking about how it's more for just helping somebody as it is for recreational use. And I love the example of, you don't want to experience this during a concert. I just could only imagine just, oh no, childhood trauma. Well, music's playing in the background, surrounded by thousands of people.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to sit here and I just have a lot of comparing thoughts, just with marijuana, for example, and now that's finally become legal, and especially in our state of New York here, where they're starting to push more and more studies about the long-term effects it has on our brain in a negative way. And that differentiating point you mentioned, I think is important to really understand that this is more like a heavily long, like, I feel like ancient medicine like this, tell me I'm wrong if I'm wrong, but like, we're talking 15,000 years of use, as
Yeah,
opposed to certain other substances which are newer.
I think that's right. And there's a great video that kind of describes what I was sharing before, called the stone to ape theory. So if anyone's listening would like to look that up on YouTube, I think it's a pretty good one. And you're exactly right. I think, personally speaking, I would pretty much never smoke weed. And the reason being that I know it has debilitating effects on the brain over time. I think it can be effective in terms of treating symptoms, but it doesn't have neurogenetic or neuroplastic properties as these other plant medicines do.
And I think right there, you just nailed it right there, man. That just separates the line between someone doing it for recreation and someone doing it to help people. So
yeah,
I really appreciate that. So we'll start wrapping this thing up. I want you to break everything we spoke about over the last 38 minutes and just summarize it for us. What's the last take-home message you want to leave to people?
So what's possible to recognize through these experiences is so profound and so life-changing that it really is not reducible to natural language. Because once we realize that it's all consciousness, everything is consciousness, and that we have, and that this is a game of life. This stage has been set for us to experience humanity and all of its ups and all of its downs and all of its imperfections. And it is a stage. And I think if we were to try to design something more perfect for a human experience, for a human trial, I think we would struggle. We've got the best of the best of emotional states. We've got the worst of the worst. We have people that are doing unbelievable good, and we have people that are doing some not such beautiful things. We have the sun, we have the moon, we have the stars, we have the ocean, we have tides, we have seasons, we have different landscapes. It's just incredible, like reality. And so through these experiences, to know there's a higher order, and that that emotions like love and joy and peace sit far above anything that could be debated, or differences between us, or these lower level tensions that arise in our everyday life, or between us and our loved ones, or between countries, that there are these higher truths that are accessible to us, not just through plant medicine, but through self-discovery. So the message that I would say to anyone is always prioritize your inner world, because that is fundamentally the game of life. The game of life, the stage, the cards that we've been played here is, do you spend your time and your energy distracted by all the things that are going on the outside? Or do you take the time and the energy to really go deep on the inside and discover that everything on the outside is actually available through discovery on the inside? And so that it's very easy to focus lifetimes, and we do reincarnate. That's another thing that you come to recognize. You can spend lifetimes focused on the outside world and make no progress on the inside world, or you could take this one and focus on the inside world and get absolutely everything you ever dreamed of in the outside world.
I love that explanation. And then last but not least, where can people find you, get a hold of you? How can they learn more about Behold Retreats? Take us through it.
Yeah, we're behold-retreats.com. Just look us up, Behold Retreats. And, we like to meet with all of our clients. So if what I've shared resonates with any of your audience, then come and have a chat, and we'll see if we can organize a game changer for you. Most of our retreats are in Mexico, Costa Rica, Portugal, Peru, and the Netherlands. So if you're up for some travel, it's not the most popular time in history to travel, but we've still got retreats ongoing.
I absolutely love it. And thank you for coming on, guys. And thank you for joining us on this week's episode of Health and Fitness Redefined. Don't forget, hit that subscribe button and join us next week as we dive deeper into this ever-changing field. And remember, fitness is a journey, not a destination. Until next time.